The stage was set, the lights were blazing, and the audience at the Late Show with David Letterman buzzed with anticipation. It was a crisp autumn evening in 2025, and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, strode onto the set with her trademark poise. She was there to promote her new Netflix documentary series, Redefining Royalty, a deeply personal exploration of her life post-royalty, and her advocacy for mental health and gender equality. The crowd erupted in applause as she settled into the guest chair, her warm smile radiating confidence. No one could have predicted that what followed would become a moment etched in television history. David Letterman, with his signature wit and a glint of mischief in his eyes, leaned forward, his voice dripping with charm. "Meghan, welcome! You've been busy saving the world, haven't you? Tell us about this new project." The audience chuckled, and Meghan nodded graciously, launching into a passionate description of the documentary's mission to spark conversations about resilience and identity. The atmosphere was light, almost celebratory, until David's tone shifted. "Now, Meghan," he said, his smile sharpening, "some people say you're using this platform to play the victim card again. You've got this whole poor me, the royal life was tough narrative. Don't you think it's time to move on?" The question landed like a thunderclap. The audience gasped, a few murmurs rippling through the crowd. Meghan's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure, her hands folding tightly in her lap. The studio, bathed in the glow of stage lights, suddenly felt colder. The other guests on the panel, a comedian and a musician, exchanged uneasy glances. The comedian, Sarah Silverman, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while the musician, John Legend, raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. Behind the scenes, producers in the control booth froze, their headsets buzzing with urgent whispers. "Did he just say that?" one producer hissed, while another gestured frantically at the director to keep the cameras rolling. The air was thick with tension, and the faint hum of the studio equipment seemed to amplify the silence. Meghan took a measured breath, her eyes locking on to David's. "David, I think it's important to clarify something," she began, her voice steady but laced with an edge. "This documentary isn't about victimhood. It's about owning your story and using it to help others feel seen. I've never shied away from hard conversations, and I'm not here to play games with you." The audience let out a collective exhale, some clapping softly in support. But David wasn't done. "Oh, come on, Meghan," he pressed, leaning back with a smirk. "You've got the world's sympathy, royal family drama, tabloid frenzy. Isn't this just a way to keep the spotlight on you? Some say you're more about fame than change." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and personal. The crowd fell silent, a few people shifting in their seats, phones already discreetly recording. Sarah Silverman tried to interject, her voice light but strained. "Hey, Dave, maybe we give her a chance to talk about the project?" But David waved her off, his focus squarely on Meghan. Meghan's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the armrest of her chair. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the subtle tremble in her hands. "David, with all due respect," she said, her tone calm but firm, "I've spent years building platforms to amplify voices that are often ignored, women, people of color, those struggling with mental health. If you think that's about fame, then you're missing the point." Her words were measured, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. The audience stirred, some nodding in agreement, others whispering to their neighbors. David chuckled undeterred. "Sure, but let's be real. You left the royal family, stirred up all this drama, and now you're out here making documentaries. Isn't that just trading one stage for another?" The question was a jab, and it landed hard. John Legend leaned forward, his voice low but clear. "Dave, I think you're being a little unfair here." The audience murmured in agreement, but David's smirk only widened. "Just asking the questions people want answers to, John," he said, shrugging. The tension in the studio was palpable now. The producers in the control booth were in a frenzy, one barking into a headset. "We're going viral, keep it on her." The cameras swiveled, catching every angle of Meghan's face, her eyes glistening with restrained emotion, her posture rigid yet regal. The audience was split, some glared at David, others leaned forward, hanging on every word. A woman in the front row clutched her phone, filming the exchange, her hands shaking slightly. Meghan leaned forward, her voice dropping to a quieter, more intimate register. David, I don't owe anyone an apology for choosing my mental health, my family, or my truth. You can call it drama if you want, but I call it survival. And I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to talk to the people who understand what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself. The studio erupted in applause, a wave of support washing over the set. Sarah Silverman clapped along, mouthing, "Wow," to John Legend, who nodded solemnly. David, for the first time, seemed momentarily thrown. His smirk faltered, and he adjusted his tie, a nervous tick. "Well, that's a powerful statement," he said, his tone softer but still laced with skepticism. "But let's talk about the royal family for a second. You've been pretty vocal about their flaws. Don't you think that's a bit ungrateful? They gave you a platform, after all." The audience gasped again, louder this time. A man in the back row whispered to his friend, "He's going too far." Meghan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it seemed like she might stand and walk off the set. Instead, she leaned back, crossing her arms, her voice steady but laced with steel. "David, gratitude doesn't mean silence. I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had, but I'm not going to stay quiet about systems that harm people. If you think speaking out is ungrateful, then we're not having the same conversation." The audience roared with applause, some standing in their seats. Sarah Silverman gave Meghan a subtle nod, while John Legend clapped slowly, his expression one of quiet respect. The producers were in a full-blown panic now, one shouting into the headset, "Do we cut to commercial? This is getting out of hand." But the director shook his head, mesmerized by the drama unfolding. The cameras captured every detail, the sweat on David's brow, the defiant tilt of Meghan's chin, the stunned faces in the crowd. The moment was raw, unscripted, and electric. David tried to regain control, his voice taking on a conciliatory tone. "All right, Meghan, I hear you. Let's pivot. Tell us more about the documentary." But the shift felt forced, and Meghan wasn't ready to let it go. "No, David," she said, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade. "You don't get to throw punches and then change the subject. If you want to have a real conversation, I'm here. But if you're just chasing headlines, I'm not your punching bag." The audience exploded, some cheering, others gasping. A woman in the front row wiped away a tear, her phone still recording. The stage was a pressure cooker, and everyone knew it. Sarah Silverman tried to lighten the mood, cracking a weak joke about the tension, but it fell flat. John Legend leaned forward again, his voice calm but firm. "Meghan's right. Let's talk about the work she's doing, not tear her down." The audience clapped, but David's expression hardened. He wasn't used to being challenged like this on his own show. What happened next would leave the studio in stunned silence and spark a firestorm online. But that's a story for another chapter. What do you think? Did Meghan handle this the right way? Should David have pushed so hard? Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for the explosive conclusion of this unforgettable clash. The studio of The Late Show with David Letterman was a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension as Meghan Markle sat resolute, her eyes locked on David Letterman. The audience, still reeling from her sharp retort, "I'm not your punching bag," was a mix of stunned silence and fervent whispers. Some clapped in solidarity, their hands clapping echoing like gunfire in the charged atmosphere, while others sat frozen, phones raised, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. The cameras, relentless in their pursuit, zoomed in on Meghan's steely expression and David's faltering smirk. Behind the scenes, the control booth was chaos, producers shouting into headsets, one barking, "This is gold, but we're walking a tightrope here." The director, wide-eyed, signaled to keep rolling, knowing this moment was television dynamite. David, visibly rattled but unwilling to cede control, leaned forward, his voice taking on a faux conciliatory tone. "Meghan, I'm not trying to make you the bad guy here," he said, spreading his hands as if to calm the storm. "But you've got to admit, your story, leaving the royals, the tell-all interviews, it's polarizing. People want to know, are you fighting for change, or are you just settling scores? The question, though softer, was another jab, thinly veiled as curiosity. The audience stirred, a low murmur rippling through the crowd. A woman in the third row clutched her program, her knuckles white, while a man nearby whispered, "He's not letting up." Meghan's posture stiffened, her hands now clasped tightly, her wedding ring glinting under the stage lights. The faint hum of the studio's air conditioning seemed to amplify the silence as she processed the question. Sarah Silverman, seated to Meghan's left, tried to defuse the moment, her voice light but strained. "Dave, maybe we let her talk about the documentary? You know, the actual reason she's here?" The audience chuckled nervously, but David ignored her, his eyes fixed on Meghan. John Legend, sitting to her right, shook his head slightly, his expression one of quiet frustration. "David," Meghan began, her voice low but resonant, slicing through the studio's tension like a blade. "I'm not here to settle scores. I'm here to talk about building something better, systems that uplift, not tear down. But you keep circling back to the same narrative, and it's not just about me. It's about anyone who's ever been told their truth is too inconvenient to hear." Her words hung in the air, heavy with conviction. The audience erupted in applause, some standing, their cheers drowning out the faint clatter of a producer's clipboard hitting the floor in the control booth. David's smirk vanished entirely now, replaced by a flicker of unease. He adjusted his glasses, a nervous tick, and tried to pivot. "Fair enough, Meghan. Let's talk about that, your advocacy. Mental health, gender equality, big topics. But some say it's performative. You know, rich celebrity, private jets, preaching about change. How do you answer that?" The question was a grenade, and the audience gasped, the sound sharp and collective. A young man in the back row whispered to his friend, "He's trying to bury her." The cameras caught Meghan's jaw clench, her eyes narrowing as she leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with controlled fury. "Performative?" Meghan repeated, her tone icy. "David, I've spent years funding shelters, amplifying voices that don't get heard, and yes, talking about my own struggles. If you think that's performative because I have privilege, then you're dismissing the work of everyone who's ever used their platform to make a difference. Privilege doesn't disqualify purpose, it amplifies it." The studio roared, the applause thunderous. Sarah Silverman clapped along, muttering, "Damn, she's good," while John Legend nodded, his expression one of quiet pride. The control booth was a frenzy now, producers scrambling to keep up. "We're trending #1 already!" one shouted, scrolling through X posts on a monitor. "Hashtag Meghan vs. Letterman is blowing up!" The director, sweating, signaled for a tighter shot on Meghan, capturing the fire in her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands as she gestured. The audience was electric, some cheering, others filming, a few wiping tears. A woman in the front row, her phone shaking in her hands, whispered to her neighbor, "She's not backing down." David, sensing the tide turning, tried to regain footing. "All right, Meghan, I hear you," he said, his voice softer but still edged with defiance. "But let's be honest, your critics say you're more about the spotlight than the substance. That Oprah interview, the books, now this documentary, isn't it all just branding?" The question was a low blow, and the audience's reaction was immediate, boos mixed with gasps, a rare sound on Letterman's set. Sarah Silverman shot David a look, her eyes wide with disbelief, while John Legend leaned forward, his voice firm. "Dave, you're crossing a line. Let her speak." Meghan's face was a mask of composure, but her eyes burned with resolve. She stood, slowly, deliberately, the click of her heels echoing in the now silent studio. The cameras followed her every move, the audience holding its breath. "David," she said, her voice steady but resonant, "I don't need your approval, or anyone's, to know why I do what I do. You want to talk about branding? Fine. My brand is truth. My brand is standing up for people who've been silenced, even when it's messy, even when it costs me. And if you think that's just for the spotlight, then you're not listening." She paused, her gaze sweeping the audience, who erupted in cheers, some standing, others shouting her name. The studio was chaos now, applause, boos, and murmurs blending into a cacophony. Producers in the booth were shouting, one yelling, "Do we cut? Do we cut?" The director shook his head, transfixed, as the cameras caught David's stunned expression, his hands gripping the desk. Meghan continued, her voice rising with conviction. "I came here to talk about a project that matters to me, to millions of people. But instead, you've made it about tearing me down. I'm done playing that game." With that, she turned, her head held high, and walked off the set, the click of her heels a final punctuation mark. The audience exploded, some cheering, others gasping, phones raised to capture the moment. Sarah Silverman stood, clapping, her face a mix of awe and disbelief. John Legend followed suit, his applause steady and deliberate. David, for the first time in his career, looked genuinely speechless, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for a comeback. "Well, folks," he finally stammered, that's one way to make an exit." The audience booed, the sound swelling as Meghan disappeared behind the curtain. Backstage, the chaos continued. Producers swarmed Meghan, one pleading, "Can we get you back out there?" But she shook her head, her expression calm but resolute. "I said what I needed to say," she replied, her voice steady. The control booth was a whirlwind of activity, monitors flashing with X-posts. "Meghan just owned Letterman." Hashtag redefining royalty. And "David went too far." Hashtag Team Meghan. The clip was already going viral, racking up millions of views within minutes. As the show cut to commercial, the audience remained divided, some chanting Meghan's name, others arguing amongst themselves. David, still at his desk, forced a smile as the cameras panned back to him. "Well, that was something," he said, his voice hollow. Sarah Silverman leaned over, whispering, "You pushed too hard, Dave." He didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the desk. In the days that followed, the moment dominated headlines. X-posts exploded with debates. Was Meghan too sensitive, or was David too cruel? Did she walk out to make a point, or was it a publicity stunt? The documentary Redefining Royalty saw a surge in viewership, with many praising Meghan's courage. David, meanwhile, faced backlash, with some calling for an apology, others defending his tough questions. The clash became a cultural touchstone, sparking conversations about media accountability, privilege, and the power of standing up for oneself. What do you think? Did Meghan's exit show strength, or avoidance? Was David out of line, or just doing his job? Share your thoughts in the comments, and join the conversation. This moment isn't just television, it's a mirror to our times.